Hi there, and welcome to Ghostly Trails. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and tonight we're going to be taking you into the world of spook and shiver as we explore some of Great Britain's most chilling ghost stories and haunted hotspots. From world-famous places like Edinburgh Castle and the Tower of London, to medieval cities with their castles and cathedrals, right down to the quaint villages nestled in classic English countryside, we will discover all kinds of dark tales. Tonight, we begin in the north, in the magnificent city of Edinburgh. We'll start with perhaps the most famous of all Scottish buildings, Edinburgh Castle. Perched on top of a rocky crag, the remnant of an ancient volcano, it is the most besieged castle in Britain, with 23 attacks throughout its history. It was home to Mary Queen of Scots until she was exiled to England, after which the castle was partially destroyed by the English. Rebuilt in 1574, it survived the times when James VII of Scotland lost his throne to William of Orange in 1688, and then the Jacobite uprisings in the 18th century, and it has remained undamaged ever since. It is regarded by many as the Scottish equivalent of the Tower of London. It houses the country's crown jewels. It served as a prison and barracks, and it protected the royal family during times of unrest. Not surprisingly, considering its turbulent past, a few resident ghosts still linger within its battle-worn ramparts. Our first trail begins several hundred years ago, when a network of tunnels was discovered at the castle, along the Royal Mile towards Holyrood Palace. To determine where the tunnels led, a boy piper was sent to explore them, a boy being chosen so as not to get stuck between the narrow walls and low roof. The boy was to play his bagpipes as loudly as he could as he stepped into the darkness. Those safely above ground kept a mental eye on him by listening for the sound of his playing, and tracked him through the city streets. Slowly the boy made his way into the darkness, the watch party plotting his twists and turns as he crept noisily deeper and deeper into the tunnel. Until suddenly the pipes stopped, when the watchers were outside the Tron Kirk, a former principal parish church in Edinburgh. A well-known landmark on the Royal Mile, it was built in the 17th century and closed as a church in 1952. Quickly, a rescue party entered the tunnel to locate the young piper, but he had vanished into thin air. For days they searched for the small boy and his pipes, so reluctant were they to call off the search. Eventually, and with a heavy heart, the city council ordered that the entrance to the tunnel be sealed with bricks. No trace of the boy has ever been found. Thereafter, on quiet days when the noise of the traffic is low, the faint sound of bagpipes may be heard below the Royal Mile, between the castle and the palace. It is also told that a drum has occasionally been heard by visitors, although this ghostly sound has not been heard for centuries. Legend now has it that the sighting or even hearing of the drummer was the harbinger of an attack against the castle. The last time this occurred was in 1650, exactly a year after Charles I had been beheaded. the ghostly drummer was reported by castle sentries, playing his drum along the battlements each night. More disturbingly, he apparently lacked a head, just like the unfortunate king. The castle governor decided to investigate the matter himself in an attempt to unravel the mystery of these ghostly sightings. He never saw a ghost, but heard a drum playing an old Scottish wartime beat, with many feet marching to the rhythm. The sounds of the ghostly procession came towards and passed close by the governor. This sighting of the drummer happened in 1650, the year that Oliver Cromwell's army laid siege to the castle, giving some credence to the folklore. Up in the Scottish borders, the bustling town of Galashiels sits amidst the kind of picturesque countryside that you would conjure up if trying to imagine an ideal of Scotland. Just outside, watching over the town, is Buckholm Tower, mostly ruined now, but steeped in spine-chilling tales. Built in 1582, local legend has it that the tower is haunted by the spirit of James Pringle, a local man infamous for his appalling temper and violent outbursts. Could he be the reason that eerie screams and other unsettling noises can be heard coming from the tower in the dead of night? James Pringle mistreated his wife and child so terribly that they had no choice but to flee their home. As a loyal supporter of the English government, Pringle's favourite pastime was to hunt down Covenanters with his two viciously aggressive hounds. One day, Pringle was called in by the local dragoons to help break up an unlawful assembly of Covenanters on Ladhope Moor, a common haunt for religious disruptors. He led the way and took the troops to the spot where the Covenanters were most likely to be, but it seems they were too late. Apart from two men, Geordie Elliot and his son William, both known Covenanters, everyone else had left. Geordie had been unable to make his escape after he was injured, having been thrown from his horse. Without an ounce of compassion, Pringle urged the captain of the dragoons to kill them on the spot. Believing, however, they might be able to provide valuable intelligence, the captain took them prisoner and locked them away in Buckholm Tower. Pringle was furious, and his anger only grew as he took to a bottle of brandy. One by one the dragoons turned in for the night, and an extremely sour Pringle made his way toward the prison cell. Drunk and still furious, he shoved the servants aside and entered the dungeon, whereupon the sounds of heavy blows, desperate screams, and the dragging of bodies filled the night, followed by an abrupt and eerie silence. Entirely unfazed and looking as if butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, Pringle left the dungeon and went back to his drinking. Not long afterwards, a woman arrived at the tower. She was the wife and mother of the two men. Pringle grabbed the poor woman and dragged her to the dungeon, where she was presented with the horrific sight of her loved ones hanging from hooks, battered, bloodied, and lifeless. She screamed in anguish, sobbing uncontrollably, but Pringle was unmoved by her grief and shouted, "Old witch!" as he left with a triumphant smile on his face. But it seems he was to pay for his brutality. As the nights went by, he was visited by the ghosts of his two victims, and he also became convinced that he was being hunted by phantom hounds. His servants would often see him fighting off invisible creatures that seemed to attack him throughout the day and night. It seems these hounds plagued the rest of his useless life, which was nothing more than a vicious circle of drunken rage and uncontrollable fear. When he finally died, he was found convulsed, still tormented by the invisible beasts, even in his final moments. Shortly before the first anniversary of his death, a group of baying spectral hounds were seen pursuing a figure towards the tower. The next night, the household heard the hounds again, but this time accompanied by a voice calling for help. When they opened the door, however, there was no one to be seen. It's said that every year on the anniversary of Pringle's death, the ghostly sounds of bloodthirsty hounds and the cries for help echo outside the tower. From the depths of the dungeons, heavy banging on the door can be heard, and some say that the ghosts of Geordie and William Elliot, along with their spectral hounds, still haunt the ruins, a reminder of the sinister events that once took place here. Some decades later, the Reverend Henry Davidson reportedly performed an exorcism and cast out the devil of Buckholm. This story is perhaps best told by Thomas Craig Brown, who wrote the history of Selkirkshire in 1886. Tradition, he wrote, further credits the Reverend Henry Davidson with laying the ghost of a laird of Buckholm, condemned to wander about his ancient tower for his sins as a persecutor of the covenant. On the night chosen for the dread operation, the minister first held a religious service in the hall of the Old Peel, and then sallied forth, Bible under arm, to grapple with his supernatural antagonist, leaving the strictest injunctions that none should dare to look forth from door or window. Some expected never to see him again, but rather to find his limbs lying scattered about the place when morning dawned, and all joined in fervent prayers for his success and safety. In about half an hour, the exorcising clergyman came back, with no change upon his countenance, except perhaps of added gravity. Without moving a muscle of his face or betraying in any way the emotions of the moment, he solemnly announced that he had laid to rest the cause of all their fear, adding that what had passed that night could never be made known. From that time forth, the devil of Buckholm was seen again no more. Now we move south, crossing the border into England. The Schooner Hotel in Alnmouth, Northumberland, dates back to the 1600s, where it was originally built as a coaching inn, serving as an important stopping point for travellers on their way to the nearby coast. Over the centuries, there's no doubt it saw through its doors a great mixture of sailors, merchants and travellers. And with Alnmouth regarded even back then as something of a wicked place, it's no surprise that rumours of smuggling activities became associated with this hostelry. The secret tunnels that connected the hotel's cellar to the port no doubt saw all kinds of clandestine transactions take place. It seems the story is getting increasingly shady. The rooms and corridors of this hotel hold tales of family massacres, murder and suicide. And with over 3,000 paranormal reports filed here, it's little wonder that the Paranormal Society has named the Schooner the most haunted hotel in Britain. Over 60 different ghosts are said to reside here, with much of the activity actually appearing in more recent times. In room 20, staff and guests have reported seeing a dark figure burst from the room and slam into the fire doors opposite. On one occasion, when this has been witnessed by a staff member, the figure turned and ran towards her. She fled the room in terror and was extremely reluctant to visit the room again. In room 28, the sound of children's voices along with a woman's scream have been heard, accompanied by a deep sense of dread felt by all present. It's thought that this room is where a family massacre took place, but there are no real official reports to verify this. In rooms 16 and 17, a number of apparitions have been sighted. Guests have reported seeing figures standing at the end of their beds, as well as pacing up and down the corridors outside. These rooms were once connected by a door, since blocked up. Intriguing, given the fact that the hauntings in these two rooms are so similar. In other rooms, a variety of sounds, including bangs, knocks, tapping, and whispering have been heard. One night during the weekly pub quiz, a man's pint of lager slid and fell from the table into his lap, much to the amusement of his teammates, none of whom were remotely close to touching the table. The next week, just as the bar staff were preparing to close up for the night, two of them saw a glass moving across the surface of a table with no one in sight to move it. It wasn't even as if the glass was sliding straight. Halfway across the table, it clearly changed direction. On a ghost hunting night, the hotel became a hotbed of ghostly activity. In room 2, a man with a thin face and crooked nose was seen staring back at one of the investigators. Another presence, this time of a woman, a lady of the night who had worked there in the 1800s. According to the medium, she'd worked there from the age of 15 until just a few years later, when she was strangled to death by a stranger. In 2020, clairvoyant Les Corney visited the pub, where he added to the schooner's already high pile of ghostly reports. His dog, Shay, was uncharacteristically uncomfortable when going upstairs and remained on edge for the whole night. Les himself detected a presence in the largest room, which quickly disappeared. He came across it again in a much smaller room and became certain that this was the ghost of a child. Consulting the various readings on all of his equipment, the words, "So sorry, Harriet," could be deciphered. So it seems there are all kinds of ghost stories of the schooner, many of which cannot be explained or attributed to historical events. The best thing, perhaps, would be to visit the hotel yourself and see what you discover. Continuing south, we'll pass through Newcastle on Tyne. This city is instantly recognizable, with an impressive collection of bridges spanning the River Tyne. The most iconic of these is the Tyne Bridge, which you will notice bears a strong resemblance to the Sydney Harbour Bridge in Australia. It was designed and built by Dorman Long some years before Sydney, and was instrumental in his getting the contract for the bridge the other side of the world. At the time of its construction, the Tyne Bridge was the longest single-span bridge in the world. And its notable Art Deco towers were originally intended to be used as warehouses, but unfortunately this part of the construction was never finished. Our first ghost story takes place at the Castle Keep, from which Newcastle derives its name. Built in 1172, the castle has a long and dark history, so it would be strange if the building didn't have some stories of spook and shiver to tell. In the dark dungeons, prisoners lived in horrific squalor, waiting in despair for their execution, which took place in the castle courtyard. Once there was a total of 18 executions in one day, each hanged, drawn and quartered, their remains displayed high up on the walls as a grisly warning to others. It was a dark time indeed. Whilst the castle is said to be haunted by numerous ghosts, the most popular phenomenon is perhaps that known as the Poppy Girl. As is so often the case, there are different versions of her story, but they all agree that she was a flower girl who many think was called Poppy. Whatever her name, she got into significant financial trouble, owing several people money, for which she was sent to prison and locked away in the depths of the castle's dungeon. It was whilst she languished in this prison that she was attacked and murdered by her fellow male prisoners. To this day, staff and visitors alike have reported the unmistakable aroma of flowers coming from dungeons, and some have even claimed to see her phantom roaming the castle, climbing the stairs of the keep. Sightings of mist, cold spots and poltergeist activity have all been reported elsewhere in the castle, and within the great hall some have even seen shadowy figures suspended in mid-air, walking where once galleries existed. The ghostly chanting of monks has been heard coming from the former Queen's quarters, and loud footsteps have been heard echoing through the various hallways after dark, when the keep is supposedly empty. Some people have even felt the touch of a cold, phantom hand as they pass certain cold spots in some of the rooms. And finally, the apparition of a woman has been spotted in the Queen's chamber as well as in the chapel, but details of her features have been difficult to find, and there isn't enough historical information to identify her. On Westgate Road, the Lichtenfield Library has stood proudly for all to explore since 1825, when it came to occupy this building. With over 170,000 books and the largest music collection in the north of England, it's no surprise that this sanctuary for book lovers has some ghosts amongst its pages. In fact, some say it's Newcastle's most haunted building. In 2022, ghost hunters were startled to find a door opening of its own accord. In the library's St. James Knott room, one ghost seeker even saw the head of a man peering at them from one of the bookcases. Staff have reported hearing footsteps when no one's around, and in the basement, book racks on wheels have constantly been found to have moved by themselves. Some staff have even felt an invisible touch on their shoulder when working in the basement. One of the head librarians retold her own experiences of seeing mysterious shadowy figures in the reading room, hearing the sound of books being placed back on shelves, as well as the rustling of paper, despite her being alone in the building. One of the ghosts is thought to be Mr. T.H. Marr, a former librarian who loved the library so much he seems to have been unable to leave even after his death. We continue our journey south. I'll hand over to Natasha Lamb.
We come now to the seaside town of Whitby, which could easily be considered one of the most haunted towns in the whole of the UK. From the ghost of Grape Lane all the way up Whitby Abbey, we will discover them all. Grape Lane.
Many, many years ago, a young girl by the name of Mary Clark had gone to the bakery that was down here on an errand for her father. The owner, who was a family friend, recognized the girl and welcomed her into the warmth of the bakery. She was there to warm up her father's tea, just as she had done numerous times. The baker left her to it, and with his back turned briefly, he heard a horrific scream. As she leant down to the oven, her long, blonde hair had caught fire. Naturally panicking as the flames spread, she rushed out of the shop and down the street. As the wind hit, the fire only spread, and despite the best efforts of the baker, she was completely engulfed in fire.
After it was extinguished, she was brought to the infirmary and pronounced dead.
Ever since that tragic event, it is thought that the spirit of this poor girl still haunts Grape Lane. The crackling sound of fire rushing past has been heard, as well as the smell of burnt flesh hanging in the air. One account claims to have actually seen a burning figure staring them down in the street, only to vanish into thin air moments later.
We come now to Whitby's most famous landmark, Whitby Abbey, which is today under the stewardship of English Heritage.
This place boasts a long and colourful history, dating all the way back to 657 AD, when it was founded by Abbess Hild as Whitby's first monastic site. Our ghost story here concerns the nun Constance de Beverley, who was at the abbey in medieval times. Exactly when is not clear. It is said that she broke her vow of chastity after falling in love with a handsome knight, and was swiftly brought to justice as soon as her superiors became aware. She was bricked up, alive, in the dungeon of the abbey, and it is said that her screams did not cease for several days until finally she died. All those years later, various accounts are reported hearing blood-curdling screams echoing around the abbey, and a phantom nun has been spotted cowering, as if begging to be released. Could it be the restless spirit of Constance de Beverley? Another apparition reported here is the abbey's founder, Saint Hilda. She has been spotted roaming the grounds and peering from one of the highest windows. It's also thought that every year on 6th of January, the old Christmas day, the sound of a choir can be heard at the abbey.
The Shambles are one of Yorkshire's most popular tourist attractions. These bustling streets of narrow, overhanging medieval buildings give us a tiny glimpse into what life back then might have looked like. In an atmospheric place like this with years of history behind it, it would be strange not to find a ghost here. An investigation in 2010 revealed all kinds of haunted happenings. A ghostly woman in black was spotted descending the staircase in number 44, and the impression of a man carrying a child appeared very briefly to a customer. On another occasion, a ghostly man was seen leaving out the back. When pursued, it seems he had walked into a storeroom which had no exit, but the man was nowhere to be seen. In number 22, poltergeist activity was reported as objects appeared to be flung across the room, whilst a faint sound of a ringing bell could be heard, but not traced.
Now we journey to Lincoln. As we approach the city, you won't fail to notice the stunning Gothic towers of Lincoln Cathedral, dominating the skyline. It stands opposite the equally impressive Lincoln Castle, and a whole array of pubs, restaurants and shops cascade down a steep slope from this epicentre. Surely there are ghost stories aplenty to find here. Built in 1072 to the order of William the Conqueror, the cathedral was constructed initially in a Romanesque style and consecrated in 1092. It was later expanded and rebuilt by Bishop Hugh of Avalon in the 12th century, to match more closely what we see today. It's no surprise that this impressive building, with its intricate carvings, draws many visitors every year, but it has gained attention for other reasons too. When the Black Death swept through Lincoln in 1349, the death toll was catastrophic, overwhelming many of the city's residents, including the cathedral clergy, who were struggling to keep up with the blessings and burials of the dead. As a result, the bodies were piled up in a mass burial just outside the grounds of the cathedral. Every year, on the anniversary of the burial, it is said that the ghosts of the dead rise from the grave and march to the cathedral, singing to save their souls. As their bodies were unable properly to be blessed, it's believed that these ghostly spirits will forever remain in purgatory, trapped between heaven and hell. The figure of a holy man, dressed in 17th century clothing, has been seen climbing the steps at the front of the cathedral, and a line of ghostly monks have been spotted in the cloisters. It's also rumoured that ghostly bell ringers sometimes haul on the bell ropes, creating a ghostly cacophony. As recently as 1960s, a woman called Constance committed suicide by jumping from one of the cathedral towers. Her ghost can be seen by some reenacting the tragic moment she leapt to her death. Just outside the cathedral is a lane called the Greenstone Stairs, said to be the most haunted street in Lincoln. This spooky stairway is haunted by 3 different apparitions. They include a Victorian woman, a monk, and a nun from the convent of St. Joseph's, carrying a baby in her arms. People who have seen the apparition report seeing the nun walk from the entrance of the convent over to what is now a flower bed where she lays the child down. If you have the nerve to travel up the steps after dark, you may well see a cleric clad in a distinctive hat and long overcoat, standing underneath a crooked lamppost. It's thought that he hanged himself from the lamppost, and his ghost now stands guard to protect travellers on their way up to the cathedral. The Strugglers' Inn was once home to an ancient tradition. This was the pub where prisoners would be taken for one last drink before they were hanged. One such prisoner was a man called William Clark, a poacher, who'd been sentenced to death for murdering a local gamekeeper. Clark sunk his last pint and was forced to leave behind his faithful dog, who was soon to be left homeless and alone. As Clark was carted off to meet his maker, the landlord of the pub could not help but take pity on the loyal lurcher, and he decided to give it a home in the pub, where it lived for the rest of its life. After the dog died, the landlord was so devastated that he had it stuffed and displayed it in the bar until he himself passed away. Today, it seems the ghost of the dog lingers. Reports of scratching and barking at the door have been heard by guests, and no dog is ever to be seen nearby. Just a stone's throw away, we find what is thought to be the oldest pub in the city, called the Lion and the Snake. 3 ghosts are reputed to roam this ancient building. The first, the Granny with the Bun, is the most widely known. Thought to be a former landlady, her ghost is regularly seen upstairs in the living quarters. Meanwhile, the spectre of a dishevelled old man has been seen enjoying a drink at the bar. As soon as he's approached, he gets up and disappears through one of the walls. If you venture down into the cellars, you may well find the ghost of a Roman soldier. Appearing much less frequently than the other ghosts, he's more often heard than seen. Some visitors have described hearing the sound of marching soldiers and the crunching of stones under chariot wheels during their visit to the pub. There are plenty of other haunted places to discover in Lincoln, but we'll leave those for another time, while we continue south. Our final tale is a truly extraordinary one. But just before we get there, Paul Barrand will show you a couple of Cambridge's most haunted colleges.
The ancient city of Cambridge is unique. The spectacular architecture of college halls loom over cobbled streets that lead to bustling markets. The libraries, ever renewing themselves with intakes of students and scholars alike, all circled by the River Cam, the bridges over which are no doubt responsible for the name of this great city. Evidence of a settlement here dates back to the Bronze Age, with its prime position on the River Cam making it a strategic crossing point. But it was the arrival of the Vikings in the 9th century that elevated Cambridge's development, with its name likely derived from Grantbridge. The university was established in the early 13th century, after scholars, possibly fleeing from Oxford during times of unrest, arrived and set up a new array of colleges. It's no surprise, then, that with the 31 constituent colleges that make up Cambridge University, that we might find some ghost stories among them. In this episode, we'll visit two of them. St John's College, founded in 1511, sits above what was once a mass grave. Beneath its structures, more than 1,000 bodies are thought to have been laid to rest, an origin story that almost demands a ghostly encounter or two. And indeed, this place is a hotbed of ghostly activity. One of the most famous ghost stories here comes from the year 1706, when Robert Grove, a fellow of St John's, stayed with Geoffrey Shaw, the vicar of Salden in Oxfordshire. During his stay, Shaw recounted a chilling encounter that had taken place just days before, in which he claimed to have seen the ghost of his old friend John Naylor, a man who had died half a decade earlier. The ghost came with a warning that their mutual friend Arthur Orchard was about to die a sudden death, and Shaw himself would also not be long for this world. Grove was unnerved but remained sceptical until he returned to Cambridge and learned that Orchard had died suddenly that week, just as the ghost had predicted. Just a few months later, Shaw too died after fracturing his skull in a fall on his church's stone floor. What became of Grove himself is hard to tell, but one can imagine what might have gone through his mind as he paced at St John's, mulling over the strange foretellings that had come true that year. In the library, students have reported ghostly encounters as far back as the 18th century. Shadowy figures roaming amongst the bookshelves, unexplained noises, and disembodied voices. It's thought that this is in fact the ghost of James Ashton, who was found stabbed to death in his room in 1746. The culprit was never caught, so it's no surprise that his spirit has not found peace and chooses to haunt the college. Perhaps the most famous ghost here is that of Dr. James Wood, who was said to be so poor that he couldn't even afford to light his rooms. He apparently used to sit in the O staircase of the second court and use the ambient light of all the other rooms to see his work. To this day, on dark nights, his apparition is said to appear on the staircase, poring over his work, and no doubt startling sleepy students on the way back to their rooms. The main gate to St John's also has ghostly associations, said to be a portal for spiritual activity, especially on autumn evenings when the mists are at their strongest. A slightly more unusual ghost has been spotted here too, in the form of a spectral black cat. Both the college caretaker and the groundsman saw the beast and heard strange sounds accompanying it too. In the early 2000s, a former porter admitted to making groaning noises and rattling chains as a prank, no doubt fueling the fires of the already rife ghostly rumours of the college. Heading to another college, Corpus Christi College is also a constituent college of Cambridge University. This college is unique because it's the only college to be founded by the townspeople of Cambridge. Established in 1352, partly in response to the Black Death, our ghost story actually hails from the 17th century. Henry Butts was a prolific physician at the college, and during an outbreak of the plague in the early 1630s, devoted his expertise to caring for the sick. It's thanks to him that the death toll was reduced, and he was widely praised for his heroism. However, it seems that Butts was an unhappy man, suffering quite severely from depression. On Easter Sunday in 1632, he committed suicide by hanging himself in the master's lodge. Since his death, staff and students alike have spotted his ghost, dressed in white, with a notable large gash on his neck. Legend tells us that some students attempted to exorcise the ghost in 1904, but it seems it was unsuccessful. His ghost has been reported many times since then. During the 18th century, a young scholar fell in love with the daughter of a wealthy merchant. Due to the norms of the time and the gulf between their social classes, they were forced to meet in secret, where they would no doubt plan a happy future together. Sadly, however, the young woman died suddenly, leaving the scholar so heartbroken that he decided to take his life shortly after. Ever since, it's thought that their spirits roam the college grounds near the college chapel, where they once dreamt of a forbidden future together.
Not too far from Cambridge, in the peaceful depths of North Essex, we come across a ghostly phenomenon that became a national story. Many of you spook enthusiasts may well remember it. It was both infamous and controversial during its time, and is still widely discussed today. This is Borley Rectory, dubbed in 1940 by ghost hunter Harry Price as the most haunted house in England. Price's original records were considered some of the most comprehensive accounts of ghostly encounters at the time, so much so that it made headlines and encouraged droves of ghost hunters into this unsuspecting little village. Writings on the walls, disembodied voices, strange lights and poltergeist activity, it was all reported here. It stopped abruptly but temporarily when Borley Rectory was consumed by fire in 1939. But the story was far from over. When Harry Price died in 1948, skeptics began to argue that his work was fraudulent and riddled with deliberate misdirection. Although many of his contemporaries celebrated his work, today they are highly contentious amongst the paranormal community. This story really does deserve its own video, but for now, we're going to give you just an overview. Before the building that was Borley Rectory existed, a Benedictine monastery had been established on the site, way back in 1362. One local legend states that one of the monks began a secret affair with a nun from a nearby convent, and it was not to have a happy ending. On discovering their romance, their superiors swiftly executed the monk and left the nun to be bricked up in a convent cell where she suffocated. There is absolutely no historical basis for this story whatsoever, but it eerily foreshadowed the tale of murdered lovers that would be revealed by future investigations. Borley Rectory was built in 1862, the earlier rectory having been burned to the ground in 1841, supposedly to serve as a residence for the parish rector. Why it was built to appear so imposing with its cramped courtyard and Gothic frontages is something of a mystery, but it was enough to excite the imaginations of the locals. The first reports of ghosts began circulating in 1863, when schoolchildren claimed to have seen the ghost of a nun. In 1900, further sightings revealed that this spectral nun was often seen around the rectory grounds and would disappear as soon as anyone approached her. So far, it was exactly the kind of reported haunting one might expect in an imposing, eerie Victorian house. It wasn't until 1927, when Reverend Guy Eric Smith and his wife took up residence at the rectory, that strange events really started to take place. Not long after moving in, the Reverend's wife discovered a skull of a young woman in a cupboard. It's speculated that the discovery of this skull triggered a whole cascade of supernatural events. Strange lights glowing upon the walls, eerie footsteps echoing from empty rooms, and the apparition of a horse-drawn carriage spotted one night thundering by. They decided to contact the Daily Mirror newspaper to report the strange occurrences, in the hope of attracting the attention of the Society of Psychical Research. The Mirror dispatched a reporter to Borley, accompanied by a paranormal researcher called Harry Price. After Price's arrival, the unexplained activity accelerated, with Price compiling detailed reports of his experiences, which mostly consisted of poltergeist activity. When he left, however, so, it seems, did the phenomena. In 1929, the Smiths left Borley and were replaced by the Reverend Lionel Algernon Foyster, his wife Marianne, and his daughter Adelaide. They stayed at Borley for 5 years, bearing the brunt of a flurry of ghostly activity. Reverend Foyster wrote accounts of this activity and sent it to Harry Price for his perusal. Strange writing had appeared on the walls. Adelaide had been locked in a room for which there was no key, and windows had been found smashed. Marianne even added that she had been violently thrown out of bed and periodically attacked by an unseen force. Harry Price could not resist another visit and sought to exorcise the place. He attempted to do so on 2 occasions, but it seems he achieved nothing, except, of course, enormous public attention and swathes of ghost hunters descending on Borley in the hopes of capturing the strange phenomena. In 1931, writing on the wall appeared, addressed specifically to Marianne, with pleas for rest and mass prayers scrawled in practically illegible handwriting. It was shortly after these wall writings appeared that it came to light that Marianne was having an affair with her lodger, one Frank Peerless. Despite many authenticated incidents of supernatural activity, Marianne confessed to fabricating ghostly phenomena in order to hide her affair, explaining away strange noises in the night and avoiding suspicion with her talk of ghosts. The sensation now was that the Peerless Borley story had multiple layers. In 1935, the Foysters left Borley, and the building remained unoccupied until 1937, at which time Harry Price returned to observe the building for more ghostly activity. With a group made up mostly of students working at weekends, they conducted a variety of experiments in order to record instances of ghostly activity. In 1938, several seances were conducted, and one medium, Helen Glanville, reportedly made contact with a nun and an unidentified male spirit. The latter eerily predicted the rectory's destruction by fire on the 27th of March 1938, and sure enough, 1 year later, that prediction came true. One Captain W.H. Gregson had bought the place and arrived to take up residence. Very soon the house was set ablaze, apparently by an upturned oil lamp. The house was completely engulfed in an inferno, leaving behind a brick ruin. It's thought that he was hoping to turn the building into a tourist attraction, cashing in on the ghostly activity, but he was not to have his wish. The insurance company investigating the fire decided it had been started deliberately and left the house as a ruin never to be reconstructed. The fire, however, did not dissuade Harry Price from yet another visit. He was determined to find the body of the nun whose restless spirit had plagued the house. Accounts vary on exactly what he found, but it's agreed that he did indeed find some bones. However, it seems likely that they actually came from a pig. This fact didn't shake Price from his narrative, and the bones were buried with ceremony at nearby Liston. In 1944, the remnants of Borley Rectory were demolished, with one last epilogue from the spirit world. Photographing the brick-by-brick destruction, Price noticed in one of the photographs a lone brick that seemed to be levitating in mid-air. With the loss of Borley, however, came the loss of Price's association, and it seemed the claim of a levitating brick was just a bit too far-fetched to be taken seriously, even by the most fervent believers. Harry Price died in 1948, leaving a trail of work that to this day remains perhaps the most remarkable story of a ghost story in England. We'll return to Borley to tell the full story, but in the meantime we hope you've enjoyed tonight's journey across the United Kingdom. From the heights of Edinburgh Castle to the harbour of Whitby, all the way down to Cambridge and this tiny village, we've found ghost stories of all sorts. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel and press the notification bell, and we'll let you know everything we do. We'll see you somewhere else very soon with more spooky tales.